Hey guys, so we're back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about tanking anxiety and basically how to overcome that sort of nervousness and the insecurity that comes along with doing a new role for the first time. Frankly, whether it's tanking or healing, it's very common for people to feel very worried and very overwhelmed with it. You feel like a lot of people are relying on you, and I think a big fear that a lot of people have is they don't want to be that guy. We've all been in dungeons with that tank that clearly doesn't know where they're going. They're clearly new. They haven't done this dungeon before. They don't know the mechanics. They don't know the way to go. They're making the dungeon take forever. They're just frustrating people. Like, we've all had runs with people like that. And while we all want to feel like, we're big enough and patient enough and whatever to be patient and understanding with people who are obviously new, there's no denying that sometimes it's still just very frustrating, and nobody wants to be that guy. The second thing that I think a lot of people are worried about is just not being comfortable with your spec's tanking mechanics and how to properly mitigate damage for whatever tanking spec you're playing. That also can feel very overwhelming, right? You roll a prot warrior, let's say, since this is a class I'm on, and you look at all these abilities and you're like, holy cow, how am I supposed to learn all this? And how am I supposed to learn, like, when to use this stuff? Like, when do I use these, big 3-minute, 4-minute cooldowns? How am I supposed to know when the right time is? And, it can feel very overwhelming for a lot of people, I think. So in this video, we're just going to go over a few quick solutions or ideas that I have for how to get into tanking if it's not something you've done before, and how to feel more confident with it. So let's get started. The first kind of really easy idea that I would say is to just go out and do your questing and your world content stuff in a tanking spec. Obviously, if you're playing a class that already has a tank spec available to it, then it's easy enough to just switch specs. If you don't have a class that has a tanking spec to it, roll a new class. Shadowlands is the perfect time to start leveling, or right now, while we still have the leveling benefit of all of our BOA gear, is still a decent time to try leveling up a new character. But yeah, I would say just go out and do quests and do world content in the tanking spec. While a lot of the questing world in Azeroth anyways, is not scary anymore, it's not threatening, you're probably not ever going to die, it's still something that can be very helpful, because as a tank spec, you're obviously going to do much less damage than if you were in a straight DPS spec. And so one thing that I do while I'm leveling a new class is, at this point it's been a long time since there's been a new class for me, but one thing that I do is I just go out and I level in tank spec from as soon as I can, basically. As soon as I can play the tank spec, I will just start doing everything in the tank spec, so that I'm learning as I go, as I level up that spec. What abilities do I have that do a lot of damage? What abilities do I have that make me take less damage, right? What are my defensive options? What's my toolkit like? And just going out and questing and doing world content and stuff can be a very casual, easy, convenient way to start learning that stuff without feeling a ton of pressure, right? Because you're just questing. And if you start getting a little frustrated, or maybe it's boring and it's taking too long to kill stuff, you can always just swap back to your DPS spec and you haven't lost anything, right? So that would be my first idea, is just start getting a feel for the toolkit that your tank spec has available to it and how to use some of those things while you're out questing. My second suggestion would be to do some dungeons, like, by yourself. Just walk into a dungeon. When you're leveling, this is kind of a little more straightforward in some ways. So when you're leveling up, if you go to your group finder tool right here on the dungeon finder section, and if you just mouse over the dice, as you're leveling, it will let you know which different dungeons you would normally be put in for your level bracket. And so this is a good way to know which dungeons are currently at your level, and then what you can do is just open up your map and find out which of those dungeons you're closest to right now, and just walk your happy little butt over there and walk right into the dungeon and just start pulling mobs and just see, like, how much damage am I taking, and can I mitigate any of this damage? What abilities do I have to mitigate damage? And different things like that. When you're max level, it's probably definitely a little bit easier to do that because you know, first of all, where all the dungeons are, and they're all going to be current content and level appropriate for you, and you don't have to worry about that. And you can just walk in and, you know, set the dungeon difficulty to normal so that it's just really easy and low pressure for you. And you can walk in and just start pulling mobs. And like I said, you're not looking to try to clear the whole dungeon, right? That's not the point of this. You're not trying to literally solo the dungeon. You're trying to get to know your spec and your toolkit and your abilities, right? So you might say, okay, here's some mobs right here. If I just stand right here whacking all of them, will they all come over to me? Looks like yes. How about if I run? Will they all follow me? Or are there any casters in the group? Looks like they'll all follow me. Okay, great. My Twilight Devastation is killing everything. So anyways, you start to get the idea. Like, here's this big guy. If I just sit here and let him smack on me, you know, will he do any damage to me? Oh, he casted a protective aura. What did that do? And just stuff like this where you're just sitting here letting them smack on you while you know, read different buffs the enemy is putting on himself and different debuffs that he might put on you and what your tanking spec does. I'm just sitting here not tanking any damage because I'm overgeared for normal, but you understand what I'm saying, right? You're trying to learn. You're just giving yourself a pressure-free sort of situation in which to learn how your tank spec works, right? So, and as you start feeling more comfortable, like if you did normal difficulty like I just did, and you were immediately like I am, like, holy cow, this is way too easy, this isn't going to challenge me, I'm not going to learn anything, it's fine, you can just walk right back out and set the difficulty to heroic and try again. But the idea is to run through a dungeon that's actually difficult for you, like not so difficult that you're just dying immediately, but difficult enough that you're actually having to think about your abilities and what you're using. And say like, okay, does my class have an interrupt, and where is my interrupt? Just so you guys know, every single tank spec has an interrupt. Please use it. Your group will thank you. But this is the sort of stuff that you're trying to learn, right? Once you find a dungeon difficulty that feels challenging without feeling impossible, you want to just run through it as many times as you can, go to a bunch of different dungeons, say, okay, well, Shrine of the Storms feels pretty easy, but Freehold was kind of difficult, and why is that, and how are they different, and is there something that my tank spec is maybe not great at? Does my tank spec suck at mitigating magic damage, for example? These are the kinds of things that you're trying to learn from your spec when you're doing these dungeons by yourself. It's just which mobs are really annoying. Like now I know the Spiritualist tries to heal himself, right? Because I just saw that cast. And so that's something that I can know now that maybe I didn't know before. And this is all you're doing is just trying to not only learn the mechanics of the dungeon and how the different mobs work, but you're mostly trying to learn your class, right? So I'm just going to stand here very intentionally trying to take damage so that I can show you guys, like, once you start taking damage, you're like, holy cow, this just threw me up, and which one of them did that? And what does my shield block do, right? Does this do anything? Does this block anything? Well, it blocks something, but these guys are casting at me, and they're still doing damage, even though I have my shield block up, and so maybe shield block isn't great for magic damage, right? Like, these are the things you're trying to teach yourself, is just how your tank spec works, right? And every tank spec is going to function a little bit differently. It's going to have a slightly different toolkit. So running through dungeons by yourself and just trying to survive and really learn your toolkit is something that has been recommended pretty much since the game started, and people will continue recommending it. I highly recommend it because it's really honestly the very fastest way to learn the in and outs of whichever tank spec you're interested in playing, right? How does it take damage? How does it mitigate damage? How does it heal back the damage? What kinds of damage are you really weak to? Are you a tank spec that kind of needs a healer to babysit you, or are you a little more independent and self-sufficient? Those are all the things that you want to know about your tank spec, and they help inform you when you start doing dungeons with other people. That sort of information helps inform you about how to run that dungeon. So that would be my next piece of advice, is just walk into dungeons and try tanking the trash mobs and learn about your toolkit. So my third piece of advice This specifically applies to max level if you're worried about tanking and not knowing the dungeon layout and the routes that people take, is to just run the dungeon a bunch of times as a DPS spec until you start getting familiar with the layout of the dungeon and the route that most groups take. So if you're wanting to do, you're wanting to tank but there's a couple dungeons you don't know, let's say since we're still in BFA, you're not really familiar with Freehold and the route that people take, just queue for it a bunch of times in a row, that specific dungeon as DPS. It's going to take forever, the queue's going to take forever, but it doesn't matter, right? You can sit in a dungeon queue while you're out doing world quests and stuff, right? So it doesn't really matter, right? I can just put myself in queue as a DPS, and then I could theoretically get on my mount and just go start doing world quests, right? Whatever kind of content I was planning on doing for the day anyways, while I'm sitting in my dungeon queue. And then when it pops, I can be like, okay, well, let's see how this tank does this dungeon, right? You're specifically going to do this not with the intent of trying to do big dick damage or whatever. You're trying to learn how the tank runs the dungeon, right? So you want to pay attention to what's the route they're taking, where are they going, what mobs are they pulling, what mobs are they not pulling. That's really helpful to know. Like, they're skipping this trash mob, right? Like, every single dungeon group I've played with so far in this dungeon has skipped this particular trash mob. And so now I know to skip that trash mob, and maybe later I'll go look into why. But for right now, all I care about is that everybody skips that trash mob. So running as DPS in a dungeon can be a great way to just get yourself familiar with the layout of the dungeon, and like I said a number of times now, just the routes that people most frequently take, so that you don't feel completely blind when you start going in and tanking. Also, another thing, if you're comfortable with healing, would be to heal dungeons. Healing dungeons and raids is one of the fastest ways, in my opinion, outside of just going in and tanking them solo like I was talking about. Healing is one of the fastest ways to learn about the different tanking specs and how they take damage, right? As a healer, you're going to be acutely aware of how the Brewmaster takes damage versus how the Prot Warrior takes damage versus how the Blood Death Knight takes damage, right? Like, you're going to be so acutely aware of those things because you're the one having to heal them, right? You're also going to be very acutely aware of which bosses in the dungeons do a crap ton of damage as a healer, because again, you're the one having to heal that damage back up. And after a couple of runs, especially, like, for example, basically the entire end part of Battle for Azeroth, Protection Warriors have been just ridiculously OP, and you see them everywhere. So as a healer, when you're healing, like, even just random heroic dungeons, it becomes very easy, very quickly, to tell who are good tanks and who are bad tanks when every single dungeon you're just seeing 95 trillion Prot Warriors over and over and over again. You start to really get a feel for it. Like, holy cow, this guy is taking so much damage and it's only a heroic dungeon. It's not like we're pushing mythic 20s here, right? Like, he shouldn't be taking this much damage, even if he has garbage gear. He's taking a lot of damage because he's not using his defensives right? And you start getting confident with knowing that that's the case as a healer, because again, you're the one having to constantly heal them. So if you're comfortable with healing in the game, I would say, oh my gosh, it popped. If you're comfortable with healing in the game, I would definitely say try that as an option to just get some really fast insight into the different tanking specs and, like I said, how they take damage. Moving on to my next suggestion, which is use the tools that you have available to you to make your life easier as a tank. So many players, I think, forget that you have a lot of tools available to you, regardless of what your class or spec is. You have a lot of tools available to you. You have a lot of tools that the game just gives you in the base UI that people just completely forget about, they don't use, they go forgotten. And you have a lot of tools in your base toolkit. Like I said, every tank has an interrupt. And so one just really simple, should be common sense, but unfortunately is not, one very simple way to make your dungeon runs easier as a tank, especially when you're new, is when you go in to a trash pack and you pull a mob and you see a mob that's casting, just immediately go run up and silence that mob, go interrupt it, so that it doesn't stand 25 yards away casting its crap at you, and instead will come to wherever you and your group are, so that your group can easily damage them down, right? It's little things like this that separate good tanks that have smooth runs from not great tanks that don't have smooth runs, right? If your DPSers are constantly getting hit by some caster's annoying, cast because you're not interrupting it, they will definitely feel it, right? So if I had walked by these mobs and just aggroed them and then walked down to these guys, well, like lo and behold, these casters up here are not going to follow me. They're just going to stay on the stairs right here, casting the whole freaking time. And now while my group is DPSing this trash pack right here, these two are just staying alive. And that's so annoying when you could easily just come over and interrupt them so that they follow you, right? And these are things that I don't see enough tanks doing that really make a difference in how smooth a run feels and how enjoyable it is to play through the dungeon, because your tank did really just what I would say is like the basic minimum kind of setup to make a trash pack easier for people to kill. So that would be an example of using your tools available, right? If you're a Death Knight, grip the freaking mob. Like, just grip it over to the pack. Don't just sit there like a hard-tard, right, expecting your group to do something about it. You're the tank. You're the tank, right? This is the kind of stuff that people get anxious about, is people expecting them to do this stuff, and they have a right to expect you to do that stuff. But also, this is why I recommend, things like questing by yourself, so that you get used to using your grip, you get used to using your interrupt, you get used to using your leg sweep or your ring of peace or your whatever it is, right? So that when you get in a dungeon, it's not this freaking foreign concept to interrupt a dang caster. So yeah, use the tools available to you. Another really important tool to use is target markers. I don't see enough tanks doing this either. So let's say, let me look for a spiritualist. Here's a spiritualist. These mobs will heal the spiritualists, by the way. They will cast a heal if they're left alive for long enough. So let's say that I'm going to pull this whole pack right here, all of these mobs. There's 1, 2, 3, no, I'm sorry, 3. There's 3 different mobs in this pack that are spiritualists, and we know that spiritualists will cast a heal if they're left alive for long enough. So if I'm in a dungeon with a group of people, right, I'm immediately going to mark one of the spiritualists with a skull to kill them first, right? So that my group knows. And as soon as that mob's dead, I'm immediately going to move over to the next mob that's a spiritualist and mark them with a skull so that they hurry the heck up and die, right? And I'm going to show you right now how to very quickly set this up. So you hit escape in the game, and you go to key bindings, and then you go to targeting. Sorry, that's not under targeting, that's under target markers, and you go to assign skull to target, and you assign this ability to mark something with a skull to whatever keybind you feel comfortable with, right? I just set it for 4. You set it, like I said, to whatever makes you comfortable. But this way, when I'm getting ready to pull this mob, I can just do this very quickly, right? I can just target them, hit my number 4, and it's immediately got a skull. So my party knows I need this mob to die very quickly. I don't have to sit here like an idiot typing in chat, hey, you guys, please kill this one spiritual, blah, blah, blah. I don't have to do all this garbage, right? I can just mark it with a skull, and this is like universal gamer language for kill this dude ASAP, right? And like I said, as soon as this one dies, then I can mark this one with a skull very quickly, and then I can mark this one with a skull very quickly, right? Just because I assigned it to a keybind. So everybody can do that, right? Once again, it's escape to the main menu, go to key bindings, go to target markers right here, and then assign skull to target, and assign it whatever keybind you want. And it's just that simple. And it's little things like this that will make your life as a tank so much easier, and it will also make the group's life so much easier. They might not understand why this trash pack is dying so quickly, right? They might not really grasp the genius of what you just did. They might be plebs. They might be new kids also, and they don't know that these guys heal, right? You know, because you had foresight and you went in here by your dang self one day and just stood here in front of these guys, letting them cast stuff at you over and over and over again until they finally started casting their heals, right? So we're just going to watch. How long does it take for the spiritualist to start casting his heals? So we have an idea, right? Mending Rapids. There we go. They're casting their heals. So now we know. These casts can be interrupted. Obviously, we already covered interrupting things. But what we're talking about is just This is why it's so recommended to just go run dungeons by yourself. To just get an idea of different mobs. Run it on normal mode so that they're not hurting you. They're not doing a ton of damage to you. I could stand here all day tanking these guys. It's not a big deal. I'll interrupt that cast. And I will kill these guys hopefully quickly, but there's some other casts going off. But my point is that this is how you learn, right? You don't just like come into the world born with this knowledge, but at the same time, I don't really think that it's like right to just expect everybody to be endlessly patient with you or explain every little thing to you, when the reality is that there are simple things that you can be doing yourself to learn and to get better and to make the game easier, not only for you but for the people that are grouped with you, right? You want to be the guy that people want to run the dungeon again with, right? When the dungeon is over, everybody's immediately hitting the join us party button because you are such a good tank and you just made it so easy for them to be DPSers or for them to heal or whatever. Like, that's the kind of tank I think most people want to be. Those are the kinds of tanks that people think highly of anyways. And there's a reason for that, right? And it's because you do just the simple little things that should be basic and should be obvious, but that too many people don't do. And if you can start teaching yourself to do those things, you'll stand out in the crowd as a good tank that people want to be around. So yeah, use the tools you have available to you, right? Use your toolkit, use your interrupts, use your stuns, use your death grips. Use these, you know, whatever you have in your toolkit to make the mob pack more manageable, to make yourself survive longer, to protect an ally, you know, whatever it is. Use the target marker icons to let your group know what you want killed, right? If you're doing high mythic plus keys or something like that where things can be a little more dangerous, maybe set a keybind for one of the moon target markers and let the mage in your group know, like, hey, poly on moon, polymorph the target that I marked with moon, right? So that's that point. Use the tools that you have available to you. Don't just like take for granted that they're there. Don't just ignore that they're there, like actually use them. So the next point that we're going to talk about is communicate, right? There's this really bad reputation that World of Warcraft has, that it's this super toxic, you know, pile of teenage hormones or whatever, right? And everybody's just complete twat waffles to new players in the game, and that's not really completely accurate. Certainly there are some people that just don't want to be inconvenienced, right? Regardless of what the reason is. So it doesn't really matter to them if you're new or if you just weren't really paying attention. It doesn't matter if you inconvenience the run. They're going to get impatient and snotty and whatever. And, you know, people like that are going to exist no matter what. But I think for the most part, in World of Warcraft, people are usually genuinely happy to meet new players, right? We all want to feel like, you know, the great teacher or shepherd or whatever that, you know, shows you all this cool stuff in the game and gives you all these tips and tricks and stuff. Like, most people genuinely like meeting new players, but there's a certain aspect of that that's all about time and place too, right? So what I'm saying is, don't be afraid to just say at the beginning of a dungeon, hey guys, I'm new to tanking. Don't just assume that they're all going to auto-kick you. This is not that game anymore, right? There's no reason to do that. First of all, the dungeons aren't ever hard enough. Certainly if you're queuing for a heroic dungeon, the dungeons aren't hard enough that people feel incentivized to kick you from the dungeon and then wait freaking an hour for another tank. Like, nobody's going to do that, right? Hardly ever, right? Maybe in Mythic Plus or something like that, but you shouldn't be tanking for the very first time somebody's like really high Mythic Plus key. So assuming that you're just doing like random heroic dungeons or whatever, don't be afraid to, like, as soon as you all zone into the dungeon, just be like, hey guys, I'm new to tanking. Feel free to let me know where to go. You know, if there's any bosses that have any ridiculous mechanics or something, please feel free to let me know. You know, healer, if you think I'm taking a crap ton of damage, please feel free to let me know. Like, don't be afraid to say this stuff. Like, take 5 seconds at the beginning of the group. Just be like, hey guys, new to tanking. Feel free to lead the way. Right? Just like that. And it's seen as friendly and open and transparent, and people are way, way, way more receptive to that, right? You'll get the people in the group, the damage dealer in the group, that's like, okay, cool, over here, right? They're trying to lead you across this bridge, over here, and then they'll sit and politely wait for you to pass them to go pull the thing, right? Like, that's a lot of players in the game that will behave that way compared to the minority that will act like buttholes, right? So just don't be afraid to communicate and ask your group for what you need, right? If you need somebody to interrupt something because your interrupt is on cooldown and you want that caster to come into the rest of the mob, don't be afraid to ask someone like, hey, can somebody interrupt that mob way over there, right? Don't be afraid to ask for stuff. There's too many people that just assume that nobody in your group is going to do anything anyways, even if you ask, and so don't bother asking, right? There's too many people that assume that, and maybe they will and maybe they won't, but you're just as much an asshole as they are if you don't even try to ask for what you need. So don't be afraid to communicate and ask for what you need. And that's the communication part of my tips. So just a quick overview in order of what I think is easiest up to what I think might take a little more time or confidence for some people is quest in your tank spec. Just quest and do world content, get comfortable with your spells and abilities. As you get more comfortable with your spells and abilities, then start moving into walking into normal difficulty dungeons and trying to tank the trash packs and maybe even some bosses in there. Don't have the expectation that you're going to kill them. Don't have the expectation that you're going to complete the whole dungeon by yourself. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. That's not the purpose. The purpose is for you to learn the mechanics of your class, how you mitigate damage, how you heal up damage. And that's the purpose of doing that. So once you've gotten comfortable with solo tanking some trash in normal mode difficulty, then move up to heroic difficulty. And once you've gotten comfortable with that level, try moving up to mythic until you've gotten to the point where you're like, okay, I officially need a healer, right? Once you're comfortable with all of that stuff, then start really optimizing your UI for tanking, right? Start making keybinds for target markers, download add-ons like Deadly Boss Mods or Exorcist raid tools for raid mechanics, and most of those add-ons will even show you mechanics for dungeons if there's anything dangerous or noteworthy, right? And then last of all is get comfortable communicating, right? Certainly if you want to be a tank, and most especially if you want to be a tank for any sort of like difficult endgame content like mythic or even heroic rating, mythic plus dungeon key stuff, you're gonna have to communicate. You can't just sit there being like this nervous, anxious mute all of your you're gonna have to communicate, whether it's typing in chat or whether it's on Discord. You're gonna have to learn how to communicate. So get comfortable with it early on when you're just doing like dungeons while you're leveling up or whatever and it doesn't really mean anything. Just get comfortable with communicating and learning how to ask for what you need. So that's all I've got for this video. Kind of short, maybe not as short as it could have been, but I sort of just wanted to address some things that I've seen on like Reddit threads and forum posts and things like that about people wanting to tank come Shadowlands and being just a little scared. And there's a lot of negative community perception out there about how people act towards tanks. Like they expect us to be this perfect, all-knowing sort of entity when that's just not the case. It's all about how you act and how you present yourself. So if, like I said, if you say right from the get-go, I'm new to tanking, people know not to expect very much, right? And they will be a little more patient. Are some people going to be assholes? Sure. But like, hey, listen, if you're expecting everybody to always be nice to you, like you're living in the wrong galaxy. So that's that. We'll wrap it up here, and like always, if you guys have any comments or questions, if you are looking for specific tips or questions about specific classes, feel free to ask in the comments below. I'll try and answer them as soon as I have the chance to, and other than that, I will see you guys in the next video.